Religion is often deeply intertwined with culture and can significantly shape society. Buddhism is an area of curiosity for many interested in Japan, be it in visiting temples or learning about rituals and practices. Having Dr. Rowe here gives us the unique opportunity to learn and hear the voices and perspectives from the priests in Japan. During his time as the Japan Foundation Fellow, Dr. Rowe conducted in-depth research on a handful of female priests about their upbringing, training, temple life, and daily life with an objective to learn the gendered realities of their experience. As a pioneering scholar in the study of female priests in contemporary Japanese Buddhism, Dr. Roll today will share with us what the current Japanese temple's life looks like for female monks, using dozens of interviews from across Japan. While female priests undergo the same training and education as their male counterparts, their voices will allow us to see how their experiences may yet differ. Dr. Roll will also speak on his experience as a Japan Foundation Fellow in 2024, and we're open to answering questions about his time in Japan. It is an honor to have him here today, and we look forward to the insightful conversation to come during both the talk and the Q&A session.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you all of you for being here today, and for the people at home watching. I would like to thank again Director Yamamoto for making this possible, and also Aishwini for setting everything up and doing the advertising and all the hard work. I really appreciate everything you've done. Thank you. I'd also like to express gratitude to the many people in Japan who shared their lives with me, who told me their stories. We shared laughs, we shouted at each other, we cried together, and yeah, I feel very privileged to do this work. Yeah. So, and again, a lot of this work was done a year ago with the benefit of a Japan Foundation grant, and Japan Foundation has been supporting me for many years in my scholarship. So there's an expression in Japanese, ongaishi, to kind of repay a debt, and this is my small attempt to do that. So what do I do? For part of the year, I teach Japanese religions at McMaster University in Hamilton. I teach courses on religion and culture. I teach film courses. And we have a lot of students with a great interest in Japan. Most of them are engineers and scientists and pre-med, but they all want to learn something about Japan. The other thing I do when I'm not teaching is I travel all around Japan and I speak to as many Buddhist priests as I can. In simple terms, I think I have the best job in the world. I have so much fun. Well, not always fun, but it's just such an enriching experience. You know, I talk to Buddhists of all types. Some are in their teens, some are in their 90s, city, suburban, rural temples of all sizes in all of the 7 major schools of Japanese Buddhism, men, women, transgender. I ask them about their lives, how they came to be priests, what limits they faced. I ask about their aspirations, and I ask about their doubts. I ask a lot about their doubts. Not to try and find out if they're real or not, but more because I think doubt is fundamental to faith, and that you can't understand one without the other. So the kinds of people I talk to: former athletes. This is a priest from Niigata. We're going to hear more of her story. She's a Shingon priest from Chiba, and that's her husband. And this is an interesting case because she's the head priest and her husband is her assistant. More on that later. They are mothers. I'll talk a little bit about the woman who's in the poster. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago, but just one of my favorite people. They love cats. They, laugh. They do whatever this is. This is 3 priests from Mount Koya. And we were hanging out and I said, okay, I'm going to take a picture. And I think what I said to them was some version of vogue it up. And so that's a standard Japanese pose. This guy was a rocker in high school, so he's always trying to be Mick Jagger, but I have no idea. This day, I have no idea. They're married, as we'll see. They have daughters, as we'll see. Those daughters learn to play hide and seek among the statues of the temples. One of the first times I stayed at my friend's temple in rural Niigata, I opened the closet and on the wall was all this like crude drawing, and it just hit me. I was like, oh yeah, a temple is also a home, right? Just to frame what I do. And my basic approach to Japanese, to religion in general, but in informing what I'm doing with Buddhism. But I think this applies to any religious tradition. This is the Buddhism we get in sutras. This is what we get at the temple, at the church, at the synagogue. Now, I want to be really clear. I don't think that one or the other of these is the real Buddhism. I have no interest in that question at all. Arguments, I have no interest in pointing at what is or isn't Buddhism, right? Authenticity is not a thing you find in the world, it's an argument. I'm interested in how people make those arguments, but I'm not at all under the illusion that I'm finding real Buddhism. I couldn't even tell you what that is. But what's interesting to me is, I don't know if you can read this, but my favorite part of this picture is that it says best angle and slightly fluffed up. I don't know what the bad angle looks like. And again, it's not one or the other. What interests me is the kind of, notice they're both like in the same shadow. They're all a McDonald's and it's all Buddhism. So what I'm interested in are the people who are in reality, in a temple, with parishioners, with children, with cats, with tax issues, with annoying neighbors, with family obligations. They're here orienting towards this ideal. And that's what interests me, is this negotiation of people who are very much in the real, but aspiring to and talking about and transmitting the ideal. And it's that, I would say my work happens here. I'm standing here, but this is where I'm interested, in this negotiation of real and ideal. So that's one of the things you should know about, that's where I'm coming from. I think Buddhism, like any religion, doesn't exist as a thing. It only exists through bodies, through people, right? Through voices, through movement. And that leads to the second thing that you should know about me, which is that primarily I'm interested in people. It just happens to be that the people I'm interested in are Buddhist. So Director Yamamoto said you were going to learn a lot about Buddhism. You could, if you ask me later, but mostly what I'm going to be talking about are these people, because I think that's how I understand Buddhism, is through these individuals. Hopefully that will come through in our talk today. Before we get to that, some context. I don't know, what everyone's familiarity is with Japanese Buddhism. But first of all, there are roughly 75,000 temples in Japan. Who's been to Japan here? Who's been to a convenience store in Japan? What are some of the things we think about when we talk about convenience stores in Japan? Are they hard to find? No. it's like trying to find a Tim Hortons in Hamilton. Like you can be standing at one and you can see 3 more, right? So for context, there are more temples in Japan than there are convenience stores. Now, that's a fun thing to say, and Buddhists love to say it. The truth is a little trickier because of those 75,000, a large number of those temples do not have a resident priest. Some of them are just a plaque kept, for various reasons, because it's too much trouble to get rid of it, for tax reasons, for reputation, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of temples that just aren't really active. On top of that, if I were a temple priest, say in Mie, I might be responsible not just for my temple, but another like 3, 8, 15, some of which I would visit once a month, once a year. So the number is a little bit deceiving, right? You have to now imagine 7-Elevens with no one in there and no products and the lights off, right? And then a local 7-Eleven person shows up once a month to sell you some delicious treats, of course, but anyway. So that's part of the context. Oh, I had this slide for that. Next, the fundamental thing to understand about Buddhism in Japan is, like, I think we have this idea of monks in snow-covered temples striving for enlightenment. Yes, for a short time, that might be part of their training, but the dominant social economic role of Buddhism in temples in Japan is care of the dead. Funerals, mortuary services. Most temples have a graveyard like this out back or nearby. And that's the main thing that priests do, is conduct funerals, offer memorial services, possibly some counseling around that, not as much as they'd like. And then doing services, for example, we'll talk later about I guess we would call it the Festival of the Dead, Obon, in August in Japan, where, deceased ancestors are invited into the home and fed. This also involves Buddhist rituals, as we'll see a little later. And that's what the primary thing that priests do. Next thing to know is that temples are generally family affairs. The head priest probably took over from his father, who took over from his father. And his son, his firstborn son, is most likely in line to take over. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Buddhist priests in Japan have kids, they marry, they eat meat, they smoke, they drink a lot. In 2011-12, I spent a year and a half, and I interviewed about 226 priests of every kind all over Japan. And near the end, I was hospitalized with like some kind of kidney stone, and they're like, "You got to stop hanging out with the priests," is what they said. The joke I say in Japan, which is not really a joke, but I say that this research gave me gout. And I didn't get gout, but a lot of the priests I met did. Anyway, and I don't want to oversell this point, but part of the reason they drink is because their parishioners drink. And these memorial services and these regular events at temples involve meals, involve drinking. I would say that if most Japanese could pick between a celibate, rule following head priest or the one they have, they would pick the one they have, because he also knows what it's like to be married. He will also have a drink with you. He understands your problems. He's not this kind of separate being. Although those rules change a little bit, or those expectations change a little bit for nuns, no surprise. But let's think a bit about what that means, right? The fact that temples are taken over by kids, their kids. Who here would like to tell me their job? I just need this of one volunteer so we can walk through this. And just for the sake of argument, I'm going to ask, you know what? No, it doesn't matter. Does anyone want to tell me their job? Yes. a translator. Okay, so we're going to imagine you as a priest. If you were within that context, you would not only have to have a son to take over. Now, this is what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine your child having a son or having children, and in order to keep your house and keep living in your house into old age, you not only have to train that child to do your profession, you have to train them to do your precise job. And you have to raise them to do that from a very young age. And I think it's worth just like putting ourselves into that reality for a second. First of all, as the parent, because if you fail to do that, because the temple doesn't belong to you, at some point you might have to move out. You will when you retire. And it's also worth, I think, imagining what it's like to be the child in this situation, right? I mean, I'm trying to remember being 7. I can't really, to be honest. But I'm pretty sure I had a lot of ideas about what I wanted to be. And as I got older, those ideas shifted and changed. The thing that a lot of Japanese priests say to me, especially the young ones, is some version of like, I don't want to travel on tracks that have been laid out for me, which is the reality. Now, prior to the war and right after the war, if you were the firstborn son in a temple, it's automatic. You're taking over. There's no discussion. But more recently, that has shifted. If I'm the temple parent now, or if you're the temple parent, you can't risk the rebellion. So you kind of got to work it. Oh, you can do whatever you want, but just take the ordination. Your grandfather would love that. Of course, you can go to any university you want, but the Buddhist university, we can get you in there. Your grades aren't that. I mean, I've literally had people tell me, yeah, my dad told me, a woman told me, she's like, my dad told me I was too stupid to go to anything but a Buddhist university. She wasn't laughing. I also laughed when she said that, but she was very serious. You can take over the temple later. For now, we'll pay for you to travel to Canada for a year. You can have fun. Go and have fun. Then come back, So there are all these kinds of strategies that occur now. Now imagine if you're a girl born into this situation. Because if you're a daughter, if there are only daughters at the temple, then there are some choices to be made. Traditionally, what happens is that daughter will marry a second son from another temple because he can't take over that temple, but he knows the business. And the general line about Buddhist universities is that the temple daughters go there precisely to get a second son from another temple. I interviewed a couple in the countryside in Niigata Prefecture, and he's like in his 60s, and he's very jolly, and he's like, oh yeah, I was the second. He married into the temple, and his wife is sitting next to him, and it's her family temple, right? But he's the head priest. And he's just laughing. He's like, oh yeah, when I showed up and told him I was a second son, and he starts pretending he's like an anime schoolgirl. He's like, hoo, 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 and he's like doing the thing with his eyes. And he literally goes like this. He goes, oh, they hooked me. And he's pulling. And the whole time she's just sitting beside him like this. And I'm like kind of laughing at what he's saying, but also very aware of her. And she's just, because her experience was very different. That's still happening. But the other possibility, if you're a temple daughter, is that you take over. And it's hard to get specific numbers about this, but it does feel like that's increasing. And it does feel like that's increasingly a choice that women feel they can make. And more importantly, that they might want to make. More on that as we go. The other thing, bit of context, is depopulation. You probably know this in Japan, the #1 graying society with highest percentage of people in their 60s, massive depopulation in rural areas. Some of you probably are on Instagram and have that feed that tells you about all the cheap Japanese houses you can buy anywhere. Oh man, I'm so excited about some of those. Anyway, let's talk later about that. And that's affecting temples as well. right? Because your temple is reliant on mortuary income. If you lose most of your parishioners, you're not conducting funerals and the temple cannot continue. In fact, apparently these economic situation is affecting Buddhism more generally. Here's a recent headline. Oh, no, sorry. Hold that thought. I wanted to show this image. I was going to show this later. I forgot I put it here. So I'm interviewing like a 27-year-old, and he's like, oh yeah, my grandmother, when I was a kid, she like took an old robe and cut it up and dressed me as a monk. And he just looks at me, he's like, look, Mark, they were brainwashing me right from the beginning, right? I mean, it is adorable, and it did work. He's a head priest now. Yeah, I was just going to say there's this great line about like the economic costs confronting Buddhism these days. I recommend this article very highly. It's hilarious. At the end, it says, in the article, it says, the majority of Buddhists now reported being forced to work 3 or more existences just to make ends meet. It's not quite that bad, but it's a problem. So today, yeah, I'm going to talk about specifically female priests. You know, I mentioned that I had interviewed about 226. Last year on the Japan Foundation, I interviewed another 40 or so. Some of those women I had spoken to before and some I had never. I've got a book written on that earlier stuff that I'm hoping is coming out soon. If any of you are publishers, please talk to me later. But for now, I'm focusing on female priests. And by that, I mean fully licensed priests who can conduct rituals and do funerals. That means I'm excluding temple wives, for example, who do a lot of the temple business and may be ordained, but are not fully licensed. And there has been work with those women that I'll mention in a minute. Now, in terms of gender, you know, when I went to Japan a year ago on the Japan Foundation, and I kept, you know, the word that everyone was using was gender. And part of that is because in 2015, the UN, right, set out their SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And one of those, number 5, is gender equality. And that got picked up in Japan, and you saw it in all kinds of companies, and, you know, it was part of their advertising. They really leaned into that. And it wasn't long before the Buddhist temples did as well, Buddhist institutions. Now, the thing with what I found, though, with the gender was it was not actually about female priests. It was about LGBTQ folks. And part of the push in certain schools of Buddhism came because of people like Nishimura Kodo. Some of you may recognize this book. There is an English version. That's the English version on the right. He's a Pure Land priest. And, you know, this book caught a lot of attention. He's on a lot of mass media. And once that happened, then the sect was like, hey, we should have some meetings and write some articles about gender. Yes, I'm not going to say too much more about that right now, but if people are interested, it's a fascinating book. There's also a transgender priest I spoke to a couple of times. She transitioned at 50, and it was very interesting to hear her account of, because she became a monk as a man, but got fully licensed later after she transitioned. I'm just mentioning it now. It's not what I'm focused on at the moment. I'm hoping scholars and journalists will pick up these stories. In terms of Buddhist women, 2 other books deserve mention really quickly. This one I can recommend. This one is about temple wives in the Shin Buddhist sect, by Dr. Jessica Starling. And basically, it's looking at how much of a temple's activity happens outside of the main hall, and how much is in domesticated space, and how much of that domestic work is Buddhism and Buddhist work. I recommend it very highly. The other book is Japanese. I've translated the title roughly. This one by Niwa Nobuko is focused on the Nichiren sect. but basically she was talking to Buddhist women in the Nichiren sect, and the theme that came out of it was this tension between being a priest and being a woman, right? The kind of femininity versus whatever being a priest is. And one of the like central issues for her was around, or for the people she was speaking with, was around shaving your head, right? So to go into your training, your head must be shaved, but it's not necessarily the case that you need that later. And different sects have different rules and different norms around that. And for me, yeah, okay, I'm in the right place. This has also shown up in my work. So I interviewed a Nichiren priest years and years ago in Roppongi, nightclub district of Tokyo. And, you know, she's a very serious, very short hair, like shaved head, very like friendly and kind, but like complained because people would come to the temple in shorts and that wasn't showing the right respect for the Buddha. Like that's her vibe. Then we just talking one day, she's married. Her husband at the time was her assistant priest as well. And she's like, oh, you know, when we got married, of course, like I had to do all the dress up stuff. So in Japanese weddings, the bride like change her outfit like, I don't know, 5 times and keep entering into much fanfare with her new outfit. And I'm trying to imagine that. And she's like, do you want to see the pictures? And I was like, yes, I do. She had wigs, so many wigs. And it's quite striking to see the person in front of you in like a bright red chiffon with a bob. So that's one example. In speaking to other Buddhist women, I heard the example of a female priest who wore a wig when she took her kids to school because she didn't want them to be bullied. We're going to meet this woman in a minute, Ito-san. I'm just making up names. Ito-san is a Shingon priest, shaved head, very serious. She told me about the problem when you go to the hot springs. Everyone knows Japanese hot springs, and also the public bath, the sento. And she told me, she's like, yeah, going to the sento or a path with a shaved head as a woman is a problem. I'm like, really? She's like, and she just deadpan. It's hard to explain how funny this was to me at the time, but she just looks at me deadpan. She's like, they all want to check the front. You know, so when you're sitting there in the mirror on your little stool and washing off, apparently people are coming to make sure. And then there's this story. This woman is in the Pure Land school. There's a temple in rural Shimane. I'm going to just play a clip. Besides being a temple priest, she loves to sing French songs, chansons. And I have a little video. She's singing in Japanese, but just to give you the vibe. Okay, when she's not being a temple priest or singing chanson, she goes to Osaka nightclubs and sings there. So just to get an idea of beginning to get an idea of the variety of these women's experiences and responses to things like shaving your head, pretty fundamental Buddhist identity concept. Okay, so I mean, one of the key, I think, lessons here that will come up more than once is, you know, it's not just Buddhist rules, it's societal, right? These temples are enmeshed in Japanese society. And we can't look at Buddhism in Japan without considering the broader social context. So how do I do this? As I mentioned in the blurb that I think went out, one of the issues for me is I don't want to kind of isolate women's experience, right? These women do the same training as the men. They have to sit on their heels for hours on end and chant and chant and chant, right? They have to do all of that, and they conduct the same rituals, they learn the same texts, they have the same headaches. But it's also not the same. And how to capture that. The metaphor I used in the blurb and the one I've been working with is this idea, in the same way that when women priests chant with male priests, there has to be an adjustment, right? Because they're singing in a different octave. And it seems to me that might be a good metaphor for women's experience in Buddhism, that it's the same thing, but it's happening in a different register. And in saying that, I also don't want to downplay that sometimes it's a very different experience. I'm not going to talk a lot about sexual harassment, but it is definitely a thing. I'll mention a couple of things. So there are places where their experiences are very different, but I'm trying to get an understanding of their experience as Buddhist priests, primarily, not just as women separate and distinct from. This is the kind of nuanced struggle that I'm going through right now. And it's interesting too to think about this, because it's not that male priests also have to deal with identity. So the example that comes to my mind right now is, if I'm a priest and I'm visiting a parishioner in the hospital, I won't wear my robes, because a Buddhist in robes means death. And so rolling into the hospital like that can send a bad message, right? Another example is with the earthquake. I'm thinking specifically not the Noto Hanto one, but in Sendai in 2011. Many priests went and took off their robes. They didn't want to be seen as like advertising for their sect while they were up there. They just wanted to do the work. So there's this thing about whether you're in your robes or out of your robes. Another story that just popped into my mind right now is I was at a regional thing, and one of the priests had been promoted high up in the hierarchy and had come back to talk to everyone. And they were like complaining, because of course, in any institution, it's only idiots up here telling us what to do, and we know what to do, right? That happens everywhere, I think. And so they were giving it to him. Like, you've changed, look, you're one of them now. And he just stopped. He's like, my robe has become high ranking, but I am still me, like this, right? And tried to separate himself. It didn't work, but I thought it was an interesting attempt. So it's not that male priests also have issues about priestly identity, but I think the important difference is, if I'm a male priest wearing my robes or not, there's not a question about whether I'm a man or not. But for the women, right, shaving your head, for example, begins to impact perception of you as a woman, right? I think that's an important distinction to understand in their experiences, right? None of the men are having anyone come and check the front when they're at the bath, right? So there are different experiences around this. Okay. And I ask female priests about this, about this idea of your femininity, as a woman, as a priest, like how that works. And I get different answers. So the one who said, check the front, Ito-san, we were in a group, and she was just like, you have to throw it away. You have to throw your femininity away and be like, I think what she meant was you have to be sexless and kind of genderless. There was a woman priest in Kyushu who married in to the temple and became a priest herself. When I asked her why, she said, because I thought that if I wore the robes, that the parishioners would stop harassing me and grabbing me in the temple. She became a priest so that the male parishioners of the community would stop grabbing her. So that's another kind of experience. I interviewed a priest in Miyazaki who told me she was doing a memorial service for a man's wife, 2nd year anniversary of her death. And she's someone who like has a shaved head, is always in robes, is very, like one of the most priestly people I've ever met. Her faith is profound. She's conducting this ceremony for his dead wife, and he's telling her he wants to take her out for drinks after. So these, again, are real experiences. And I don't want the story just to be that, but I want it to be clear that that's also happening. This will come as a surprise to some and absolutely not as a surprise to many, unfortunately. So some more stories to get into some of this. I think one of the things that I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what it's actually like to do this work and some of the complexities around it. You know, there are times when I'm in Japan and doing this work and I'm in a room and I just can't believe I'm in this room with what's happening. I don't know how someone like me could be in the space. I'll give examples in a minute. Last year, I was lucky enough to interview 4 female priests from the Shingon sect. It was arranged through a friend of a friend. The problem when other people arrange it is it's not the way I like to do it, but because they've done it for me, I have to smile and say thank you. So normally I like to just be one-on-one in a quiet space. So we have all the space we need. We can talk usually we talk for 2 or 3 hours. But he was like, the head priest was organizing it. And I find out last minute it's going to be 4 priests at once. I also find out he's going to be there. I also find out my friend, the male priest, and another professor from Tokyo University are going to be there. So now it's 8 of us in the room, and I've got to somehow interview these 4 women in under 2 hours, all at once, with this kind of audience that I'm afraid will kind of stunt, you know, people wanting to really open up. But the biggest problem, and those of you who have been in Japan will appreciate this, was the difference in status of the 4 women. There was a young woman who had just started training at that temple. And then there was the Ito-san, the one, I don't want her to be identified solely as check the front, but it's the shortest way to introduce her. I mean, she's very established in Irai, in her sect. So that was my biggest concern, was how to get them all talking, you know, because oftentimes if you have a difference in status in Japan, only the person with the highest status is going to speak. So one of the things I did in that moment was, and I told them, I'm like, this is a problem. Here's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that with the status, you're not going to talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with you, the youngest beginner, just to kind of reverse how it would normally be done and to hopefully spur something. It worked out great. She was a talker and she was crying within 5 minutes, which I'm not saying that's a good thing, but what it says to me is that she feels safe enough to share what's going on. And, you know, she had a lot of stories about how she ended up as a priest. There's a lot I would like to say about that conversation, but I think what I'll do is I'll just mention one of the stories. And this is also involves doing these interviews. Oftentimes when you're interviewing someone, they get to a point in their story and then they say something in Japanese like "iroiro atta," like, and then stuff happened, or, you know, or yada, yada, yada. And that's usually a place with a lot of stuff. And if you can get there, that's great. When I listen to my early interviews, I'm so excited. And I also want them to know that I belong there. So that they're like, oh, do you know about this? And I'm like, oh, I know about that. You don't have to explain that. And I'm just so excited. So they're like, oh, and then this happened. And I'm like, oh, that reminds me of. And later I'm looking at the transcript and there's this really good thing happening. And then I'm just jumping in. And so all of my early notes, I've just written idiot like 7 or 8 times throughout the whole interview because I'm just breaking it off. What I gradually learned is that everybody has something they deeply want to talk about, and that my job is to get them there as quickly as possible and get the hell out of the way. And part of that involves being attuned to these silences, to body language. So I was doing this interview, and one of the women I noticed she kept saying over and over that she took over her temple. It's only been 3 years, she said. And she said it like 4 or 5 times. And I kind of was like, And we went on for a while. And finally, I just said to her, I'm like, you've said that 6 times. And I apologized. I'm like, normally I'm not this direct, but we're on a time crunch. There are 4 of you. I'm just going to ask what I need to ask right away. And I'm just like, what's up with this 3 years? And she just paused and then just broke into tears. And what it was about was because she took over, as many female priests do, because of a death. Her father died. Her brother was at another temple. She had to take over or else lose the temple. Not just lose the temple, but also like multiple generations. We'll talk about this later, but it's not just the temple. It's all the people. And think about it this way. It's just not all the people. It's people who have known you since before you were you, who raised you along with the temple, your responsibility, the weight of that. So of course she took over. And of course she was completely and utterly overwhelmed. And it wasn't just one temple, it was 3. They ran 3 temples of different sizes. And it was actually a very beautiful thing because she shared. And my friend, the male priest, and the sociologist from Todai were just kind of like stone-faced and didn't know what to do. But the other priests were right in there. And Ito-san, you know who I mean, who is famous as for counseling people. She's just really good. And I saw it in action. She just jumped in and she said, no, you were chosen. And she really pushes, like the Buddha, the Honzon, the main Buddhist figure of your temple chose you. You were chosen for this work. There's no doubt. And the other women were all getting engaged. And then she kind of breaks out. She's like, it doesn't feel like I was chosen. And, but it was such a moment of these women coming together. And it just, to me, it captures a lot of their experience and the way they talk to each other. Normally, I like to interview one-on-one, but one of the great things about interviewing more than one priest at a time is sometimes they forget I'm there and they talk to each other. And then it changes, right? They're not in interview mode anymore. And that's what happened in this space. It was quite amazing. I would love to say more about it, but it brings up a couple of points. One is, right, that for most women head priests, they weren't born into it. They weren't raised to do this, right? That woman with the cat in my opening slide, her brother took over. She had nothing to do with Buddhism. She was do you guys know what a bosozoku is? She was the leader of a biker gang in her teen years. She was a badass. She got married, got divorced, had cancer, and then her brother died suddenly, and the local priests were like, "You've got to take over." And she's like, "But I'm 48. Like, what are you talking about?" And they're like, "No problem. You were a swimmer in high school." And then she's like, "That's right. I was a swimmer in high school. I could do this." And I went to the training, she told me. I'm laughing the whole time. I'm like, "How was it?" "It was like being hit by a truck," she said. But precisely because of her background, that temple being in Roppongi, a nightclub district, she's perfect. She's passed now. She was perfect. When the young kids are hanging out, waiting for the first train in the morning, smoking, like in front of the temple, she would go out there in the robe and they'd be like, "Okay, we're leaving." And she's like, and would speak to them in their own like idiom, be like, "No, come in. Let's have a beer and talk." And not many people could pull that off, right? But again, she was there because of a death. And that happens again and again in these stories. I'm thinking of a woman who shared with me. We were in a group as well. And she told me the point where she knew she had to take over. And at that moment, all the aunties from the neighborhood took her aside and said, "You don't have to. will be okay. And she just wept at that. But of course she took over, but that, everyone understood what was involved and what sacrifices she would be making for the community. Okay, next story. Oh, sorry, here are the 4 women. This is Ito. She reminded me kind of like a boss in a gangster movie. Like she was kind, but like she spoke kind of rough and very direct. Yeah, I really liked her. This is the young one who's just entered. This is the woman who just 3 years. Yeah. And that cat followed us everywhere. Okay. So this is, I showed you this picture early. Let's call her Fuji. She's in rural Chiba, about like an hour and a half from Tokyo. She was not born a temple priest. She was born as a lay woman, but her family home and business, a fishmonger, was on the temple grounds. So she grew up playing on that temple. The old priest didn't have an heir and asked her if she'd like to, and she did. She's the exception, not the rule, in terms of, like, she's constantly bubbly and happy. I've never, ever seen her sad or down. And one of the stories I'll tell is of a day I spent with her. So I mentioned earlier, some of you know about Obon. This is in mid-August when the family dead are invited home, where you clean graves, and there are Buddhist services in the home. Part within Obon can be a special day for people who have only died within the last year, Nibon. And I traveled with her on a day where she visited, we did 25 households in a 10-hour day. We were driven everywhere by her kind, older, retired parishioner, Mr. Sasaki. And it was impressive. The most impressive thing to me, actually, was that she went 10 hours receiving tea in every house, and she never peed once. I mean, the driver and I were like out in the rice paddies like every 2 hours, and she was just solid. She said, you can train. I was like, I don't think you can, but she said you can. And there's lots I want to say about that day. I mean, it was 10 hours. We're like into the house. They don't know I'm coming. So she's walking up, their family are outside in formal clothes, and she's like, and they're like, oh, welcoming her. And she's like, yes, yep, this is Mark from Canada. He's studying Buddhism. And I'm like walking behind, and kind of, if they ask me, I'll explain. But then I'm in people's like living rooms, in very intimate spaces, just wondering how I got there. And in most of them, they would have a temporary altar. There's some variation of this in most homes, with offerings of food and incense and flowers. And I'm just going to talk about one visit that day. This was like later in the day, maybe 17th house we visited. And it was of an older woman whose husband had died a few months earlier. And she was all alone and kind of couldn't do things. So here we are lighting the welcoming fire. You should have a little fire to welcome the deceased. So we were outside with like what looked like chopsticks, but you see Fuji like down. I was finally like, I went to her, I was like, I was like, I'll do that. You shouldn't be doing this, right? So she went in to help, of course. Just to show you, like, this is her altar. And she didn't like, Fuji went over the day before and like kind of roped it around this dresser, just kind of. So just to give you an idea, like we're in a very different kind of financial state. And, and she's all alone and doesn't know how to do this. And it was just the 3 of us. So Fuji is facing the altar and doing the prayers and doing the mudras. And I'm kind of just sitting beside the widow. And initially I'm kind of behind, but she begins bawling, really just crying and weeping. And I mean, the hospital bed that I think her husband died in is right beside us. It's still there. It hasn't been taken away. And I don't know what to do, so I kind of get a little closer to her and really like put my hands together, and eventually I even put my hand on her shoulder. And I'm at a loss, you know. And Fuji has finished. She can hear what's going on, so she abbreviates the service. And she turns, and we're all like, sorry, this is how close we are. You know, we're right. It's pretty intimate. And Fuji just turns and laughs, head back and laughs. And my initial reaction is like, I want to like protect the widow. I'm like, what are you doing? That's so inappropriate. But it was perfect. You know, it was the laugh of a daughter, right? Or a granddaughter. It was the laugh of, oh, you know, it's okay. You know, we understand. And it worked. I mean, it worked. Like the woman was just started kind of getting back to herself. And she's like, yes, why am I crying? Yes, it's so good. And then we're talking a bit further. I mean, and Fuji's like, and I'll be back tomorrow to help you clean this up. And we're gone. The whole visit's been 12 minutes. And this is the kind of virtuosity that I also like want to talk about. One of the things that I pay a lot of attention to is not the formal ritual, but all the things that happen in between. So, you know, each house we're in there for 10 minutes, but most of Fuji's work that day was like walking to the car with the people and explaining things to them and answering questions, right? She, you know, they give her an offering envelope and tea. She doesn't drink the tea often because of what I mentioned before. And we're out the door. But as we're out, they're like, oh, and what about this? And, you know, so, and also the way in which she would take Buddhist stories and adapt them to a local audience, right? And this is one of the things I'm also fascinated by, in the way in which like formal Buddhist stories change when they go through bodies and into local communities, right? The way they're adapted and the way the improvisation happens. Yeah, this kind of in-between work, but also the way in which, if you just look at sutras, it doesn't really capture what priests do. How many people know the story of the mustard seed? Has anyone heard that story? So it's the story of a woman whose baby dies, and she's so racked with grief that she carries the baby around begging everyone to please help her child. And people are basically saying, well, go see the Buddha, he can help you. She goes to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, if you find me one mustard seed from a household that has not experienced grief, I can save your child. So, you know, then she proceeds. And of course, at each house she goes, they've encountered grief. And eventually she comes to a realization, is able to accept the death and let go, and eventually ordains and becomes a Buddhist nun. Very powerful story. When I'm teaching this story to my students, I run around like holding a baby, begging them to help me, you know? It's a powerful story. You know what else it is? Never, ever, ever used by a Buddhist priest in the face of grief. Never would a priest pull that story out for a family who had lost someone. And I think there's a lot to learn about Buddhism in that fact. You know, when I mention that to priests, I'm like, what do you do? Because most priests in Japan have encountered a young death, right? What do you do? Like, what about the mustard seed story? And they're like, no. You know, there's nothing you can do. Mostly what you do is just sit with them. It takes time and contact, regular contact and time. Okay, speaking of. Okay, next priest. This is, let's call her Asa. She's a Shingon priest. She's a sermonizer. She doesn't have a temple. She's a professional sermonizer. She is the most, I said I wouldn't say real or not real, but she's the most, I've never seen faith stronger than that. When I first interviewed her, she sat for like 3 hours without moving or touching her tea on her knees, And like her lower body didn't move, but her upper body was so full of light and stories and action. Amazing storyteller. And the reason why I want to tell her story is, again, about how doctrine takes shape in lives. So she was also not temple born, but she got interested in Buddhism as a teenager and became ordained. Her family bullied her. They wrote the name of Amida Buddha on her foot when she was asleep. And the next day when she was walking around, they're like, you say you're a Buddhist, but you're dishonoring the Buddha by walking on him. And she's like, what do you mean? And they're like, look at your feet. And they've, crudely written Buddha on her feet. This is the kind of reaction she got at home. When she ordained, her teacher came to her and said, are you a Buddha? And she's like, I've been a priest for like 30 seconds. No, of course, I'm not a Buddha. And she still says, like, his sadness at her answer is the hardest thing she's ever seen. And he was so disappointed. And he said, okay, well, let's go for a walk. And the cherry trees are out, and they find a beautiful cherry tree with the blossoms falling. And he's like, isn't it beautiful? She's 19. She's like, yes, it's beautiful. He's like, oh, but look at those weeds. And she's like, oh, sensei, I'll take care of it. And she jumps down and begins picking the weeds. And he takes her aside and he says, this is the difference between our Buddhism, which is, Shingon is esoteric Buddhism, versus exoteric. So let's say a Pure Land school. But he says, there's a spirit in the tree. If you pick those weeds, they will grow again. If you love the tree, if you see the spirit in the tree and love the tree, it will grow. It will grow branches. It will grow leaves. And that shade kill all the weeds naturally. Thank you. And this is kind of her take on everything. She does this kind of almost reversal of things. How does it? So her belief is that we are all innately Buddhas. I mean, this is the belief of her school. And there's one Buddha, Dainichi Buddha, also known as the Cosmic Buddha. If you've been to Kamakura, if you've been to Tofufuji in Nara, the great Buddha is Dainichi. And the idea is that everything is some manifestation of Dainichi, right? Me, you, this room. And I'm like, she's explaining this to me, and I'm like, okay, that's great. But like, so I'm Buddha when I'm drinking my coffee in the morning. I'm Buddha when I spill my coffee and I swear. I'm kind of like, am I always Buddha? And she's like, you have to live as if that's the case. And one way it manifests in her life is this. How many of you, when you're talking on a cell phone at home to someone, are you standing like this very carefully talking to them? Or are you walking around, moving things, adjusting things, making coffee, right? These are all the things we do while we're on the phone. So for her, she's like, when I'm on the phone, I'm talking to Dainichi Buddha. So I stand in front of a mirror. And I recommend trying it the next time you're on a cell phone, especially with a family member. Stand in front of a mirror for the entire conversation. See if the other person says, like, what's going on or notices. Because it does change, like your expression changes. And these are the kinds of ways in which she kind of lives this stuff, right? Since I'm running lower on time, I'm gonna keep moving. I would love to talk about her more. Here she is, and here's a good example with a male priest who's invited her for a talk, and we're going out. He's dressed this way. She's dressed that way. But I don't want you to get the idea that she doesn't also enjoy herself. That's her. We had a good time. Right. So, yeah, I guess I'll jump to like, what are the things that this work is teaching us? What do we learn? So what? One of the things I've noticed when we talk about gender, when I talk about gender in Buddhism, and maybe I might even get a question like this tonight, and if you're planning this question, I apologize in advance. Sometimes I get something along the lines of, yeah, it's tough in the institution, but the sutras are so egalitarian, right? The sutras offer Buddhahood for all. There's no misogyny in the sutras. First of all, yes, there is. Like, there's enlightenment and Buddhahood for all. The catch is you turn into a man first. There are specific examples. And that's fine. They were written in a certain time and place. That's institutionally as well. If, for example, you've been a Buddhist nun for 50 years. You've done nothing but good work. You've saved orphans. You've done everything. If I become a Buddhist priest this morning, I sit in front of you in an assembly. So institutionally, right, these distinctions are still there. But more to the point, when a lot of times in Japan, when famous scholars or Buddhists that are representing their sect, or when there's a conference about gender in Buddhism, one of the things I've noticed is that a male head priest will get up and start quoting from sutras. And my thing is like, so what? Like, what is the relevance of that to what we're talking about here institutionally as women? And part of my response to what that are these stories, are collecting these stories and trying to form a real concrete image of what's going on in the sects, because they are facing declining numbers. They have some real problems they're facing, and citing sutras won't address those problems. And again, that's in a way, I love the sutras. I love the stories. I teach them, I chant them, but I don't think they're the answer to this particular problem. And this brings up another point, which is what we scholars would call intersectionality. Basically, what I'm saying is that these aren't women's problems. These are Buddhist problems. These are sect problems. These are societal problems, and they have to be addressed as such. Having kids, raising kids is not a woman's problem. It's a sect problem. I mean, it's a societal problem, but it's a sect problem too, right? One of the things that was so interesting for me after I interviewed those 4 women, and 3 of them were crying as part of our conversation, after I'm in the car with my friend, the head priest, and the sociologist, and both of them are kind of like shy at first, and they're like, does that happen all the time? And I'm like, if I'm doing my job, hopefully, I mean, because that means we've got to something real. And my friend Ogawa, he's just like, he laughs, and he gives me a nickname. It works better in Japanese, Niso-san o nakaseru maku. But basically, it's Mark who makes the nuns cry, which is kind of cool, but I don't make them cry, right? It's the situation. And the other irony of that particular moment is that his daughter is taking over his temple. And he was surprised at the stories he was hearing. Yeah, I mean, I think that also shows how systemic some of these issues are. And then finally, yeah, just this happened naturally around. The other thing I'm really interested in is choice. And, I mentioned before that you can't really force priests to take over anymore. But when I ask priests, like, how it happened, most of them say, oh, I wasn't forced. It happened naturally. Shizenni. And then I'm like, okay, tell me about it. And they tell me their stories. Here's a story. If you know any Buddhist priests in Japan, check this with them. Here's an experience that I would say 99% of all priests have experienced. At some point, usually around 6, 7 years old, one of the aunties or grannies from the neighborhood is going to come up to you, pat you on your head, bozu bozu, itsuka tanomu yo, right? Little monk, someday you'll do my funeral. And I'm like, shizen chao, that's not natural. That is not natural. So it's just very interesting the way, to me, that they're socialized, right? But again, one of the things that comes out, like that story I told you about the woman who cried because the aunties and grannies were like, you don't have to take over. You don't have to worry about us. We're okay. You live your life. But what I find is, so I was interviewing a priest last year. It was one of the only interviews by Zoom. And I'm pushing her on this issue of choice, that she chose to take over her father's temple. And we're back and forth, and I don't think I was like too pushy, but I didn't let it go. And at a certain point, she just grabs her head like this and like down. And she's like, listen, Mark, if I don't believe that I chose this, I don't know what I'll do. I can't, if I didn't choose this, I don't know how I can continue. And it really got to me. And I think a lot of us, even if I think about myself, how much did I choose the path I'm on? It's, you know, it gets into a deeper philosophical kind of question around that. But it seems to me like that there is this kind of expectation and pressure, very subtle, very nuanced, or not so subtle, like someday you'll do my funeral, not subtle. But, you know, you've known these people your entire life. They're counting on you. And that kind of, that like being kind of counted on is such a key moment. And I feel like I'm still trying to get at this. I feel like it lands differently for sons than daughters. I mean, I think this is where social expectations around being a good daughter kind of slide in, and it gets kind of messy and complicated. So that's where I'm at right now with it. Yeah, I don't think I could answer the questions myself that I ask of them sometimes around choice and how I got here. Yeah, I would just close by saying, you know, there are lots of, you know, the thing that continues to fascinate me is just the individual lives and the way that an individual life is mixed and takes shape with Buddhism, and the kind of Buddhism that comes out of that is just a constant source of wonder and joy to me. And it just continues to fascinate me. And just this basic idea that you need to understand Buddhists as Buddhists, first you have to understand them as people. And this has been kind of my guiding light. And hopefully it's all going to work out. Okay, I'll just stop there. I think that's about time. I wasn't going to show this slide, but it's my favorite expression in Japanese. You know, this idea that, you know, the sacred is made out of profane material, right? This Buddha, I mean, geta, right? Shoes, the lowest form, this kind of everyday thing, are both made from the same piece of wood. And that's also a guiding principle for the work I do, right? Okay. Thank you.
So as I shared earlier, Dr. Rowe was a Japan Foundation Fellow. So I just wanted to ask if you have any advice or any tips for upcoming Canadian scholars who might want to do some field research in Japan?
Well, apply. Apply for everything. If people are thinking about that, please reach out to me at McMaster. I can, if I can offer advice, I will. Talk to professors or other researchers or journalists about your idea, and, you know, get some advice about how you might want to study it, what would be involved. Talk to people who have done work on the ground in Japan, because it's a very, I mean, like any country, it's got its own flavor for doing research. But yes, apply for Japan Foundation. And there are other, as I found out from Director Yamamoto, there's other money coming from Japan Foundation, well, or that you know about, that other groups are doing, I should say. So there are lots of ways to go to Japan. A lot of my students go to Japan initially on JET, the English teacher program, and then proceed from there. There are also Japanese government scholarships. There's a thing called the MEXT, run by what used to be just the Ministry of Education, but now is much more complicated. It's called MEXT, and they offer money to go and be a researcher. I was on that scholarship back in the day. So the good thing about studying Japan is there's money for it. The other good thing about studying Japan is awesome. The food is great, people are lovely, the country is ridiculous. So if you can go, go. I think my basic advice is go. Like, there's so many times where I'm tired or it's cold or I think the event is not going to be worth my time. And I'm always just go. And it almost always works out. Something interesting happens.